Antonia Won was our intern from January to June of 2008, 9 years ago. The highlight of her internship, I think, she can correct me, was her leadership of a work trip to New Orleans after the hurricane there. But she also worked with the social justice and building committees, and for a frantic few weeks when we thought we were going to have to take out the tree in the center of the courtyard, she brought us her previous life skills as a landscape architect. The first thing she said to me yesterday when I met her on the patio was, "That tree is still alive." And so it is. It turned out that it was only dying because we weren't watering it enough. Antonia is a Canadian. She has served 2 Unitarian Universalist congregations in the 9 years since she was here, Kalispell, Montana, and Bend, Oregon. And in addition, in between, she served on the field staff for Western Canada for 5 years, consulting with congregations in mid and Western Canada. She's on her way back to Canada for a sabbatical year now and thinking about what her next ministry will be. Antonia, it is so good to have you back.
Thank you, Christine. I'm not used to being the shortest one up here, so I think I'll change that. And I want to mention this is the stole that Christine made for me and presented me with at the last service that I did here of my internship. And it was the first stole I ever received and very meaningful to me. And it has New Mexico on the back side. So it is my delight and privilege to be here and to be the first of your Sunday series this summer. I do believe you will have a wonderful time. Now, once upon a time, I got an unusual birthday gift. It was a certificate to go paragliding off of a 3,000-foot high mountain. A gift certificate that required me to literally jump off a cliff. It was from my husband. The mountain, as I said, was over 3,000 feet high in a beautiful setting overlooking the city of Vancouver where we lived. My children and I had often watched paragliders landing in our neighborhood soccer field, watching them play and twirl on the updrafts and breezes, and holding our breaths as they barely made it onto the field, skimming the forest and rooftops as they landed. Have you ever stood at the edge of a cliff or a tall building or even a balcony and imagined throwing yourself over the edge? Tossing fear to the wind and experiencing the freedom of the jump and the fall? Truth is that I'm a bit of an adventurer, and the idea of being one of those people falling from the sky made me feel rather daring, so I was pretty excited about it. The day arrived, and my family and I waited on the soccer field to meet the person who would take me up the mountain. A couple of chatty German tourists asked what we were doing, and upon hearing about my prospective adventure, the 80-year-old man spontaneously decided my adventure suited him too, and that he would join me. The day was hot and remarkably still, and we took the gondola up to the top of the mountain where we baked in the sun for an hour and a half, waiting for a breath of updraft to catch our chutes. So far from the dramatic leap off a cliff, we, in our tandem harnesses, ran clunkily down a slope, barely clearing the treetops, but getting aloft indeed. Woohoo! Finally. Did I mention it was a still day? There was no movement in the atmosphere whatsoever. Not a breath. My jump was 7 minutes of completely uninspiring descent, straight from top to bottom, no different than sitting in a chair in my dining room, albeit with a more interesting view. And when I came to Earth, I found that my family had mistakenly photographed the landing of the 80-year-old German and had run out of film for me. This was before cell phones. In the end, it was not the daring, exhilarating, challenging experience I'd imagined. In fact, it's been far more exciting to merely sit on the edge of a cliff and feel that incredible mixture of sheer fear of falling and the irrational and terrifying impulse to jump. The power of the freedom to choose to jump or not is itself frightening to the point that I always beat a hasty retreat from the edge as my knees start to weaken and my balance becomes questionable. After all, there is no going back on a choice like that. Do you remember when you made a choice like that? Or even thought about it? One that you knew you could never undo, that would forever change your life? Have you ever turned away from a choice like that out of fear? The awesome freedom of that kind of irrevocable choice and the fear it creates in us is something that the philosopher Kierkegaard wrote about. Søren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher of the 19th century, and he's the man credited with coining the expression, a leap of faith. More accurately, he used the idea of the leap to describe the transition he believed was necessary for someone to become faithful. The leap was not a leap of faith, it was a leap to faith. You see, just as you cannot both remain on the cliff and jump off, Kierkegaard felt you could not both be a believer and a non-believer at the same time. Like being a little bit pregnant, the leap described a change from one quality to another, a change in which one cannot possess both qualities at once. For example, in the story of Adam and Eve, Adam makes a transition from being without sin to possessing sin when he chooses to eat the apple after being warned by God not to. So in Kierkegaard's mind, Christianity involved many paradoxes, not the least of which was the paradox of Christ being simultaneously fully human and fully God. And to become a Christian believer meant one had to accept this paradox, that in order to know faith, one has to let go of trying to know what it is or anticipating what it's going to feel like, that one must set aside the safety of rationality to engage the mystery. Now, were Kierkegaard to visit one of our Unitarian Universalist congregations today, he would more likely get an argument about the existence of Christ than the paradox of his being simultaneously fully human and fully divine. But that's another sermon. Let's focus on the alarm bell that's relevant to this sermon, becoming a believer. Because I know it's ringing in a few of your heads. And let us remember that Kierkegaard was a learned, respected, and disciplined academic. Being a believer did not mean abandoning all sense of reason. It is to accept the mystery of life and our vulnerability in the face of it, when our minds and sometimes even our hearts would steer us to ignore it. In the words of Christian theologian Dan Migliore, faith is no sedative for world-weary souls, no satchel full of ready answers to the deepest questions of life. Instead, faith invariably prompts questions, sets an inquiry in motion, fights the inclination to accept things as they are, continually calls into question unexamined assumptions about God, ourselves, and our world. Consequently, faith has nothing in common with indifference to the search for truth or fear of it. or the arrogant claim to possess it fully. True faith must be distinguished from fideism. Fideism says we reach a point where we must stop our inquiry and simply believe. Faith keeps on seeking and asking. So a leap to faith means releasing ourselves into a new and unknown place, to leap without knowing whether the parachute will work or not, to do what doesn't feel familiar or rational. Do we have a choice about how big a jump we want to take? I was discussing this with my son once, and he stated his preference for bunny hops of faith. Less falling potential, he said. If only life were so controllable. It's not. More often it seems we are thrown off the cliff, that something happens in our life that means it will be changed forever, never to be the same again. The leap to faith may be forced upon us because what was cannot be reconstituted. There is no going home, no unjumping the jump, no reversing the flow of time and history. And yet, there is no quota for change in a person's life, and our experiences are all very different. Some of us have very stable lives and only encounter serious challenges to our habits of being occasionally, which doesn't make it any easier. Others of us have lives of uncertainty or fluidity in which the sands of life may shift under our feet any time. Others of us have very difficult lives and must continuously struggle to remember who we are in the face of the challenges before us. Our fears vary by our experiences in our natures. I have no fear of jumping off a mountain, and you do? You have no fear of public debates, and I do. How then do we deal with the change that forces itself into our lives when our normal ways of being and our logical habits of thinking become inadequate or limiting? How do we manage our fear and control our reflexes and reactions so that we don't destroy what remains? Where do we find strength and compassion we don't feel? In what do we ground ourselves and find strength to weather our inner upset? These are the things that religion helps us with through metaphors and symbols and stories and beliefs, rituals and community. For these arise out of the experiences of our ancestors. How we put these into practice in the midst of difficult times is more important than the actual metaphors and beliefs and so on. But they serve as guideposts. The choice of how we will live through a time of ambiguity and uncertainty is always our own. Are we willing to be changed? Can we trust that we will experience good again? That we'll find new truths when we surrender the truth we know now? Can we believe that we will ever be whole again by allowing ourselves to be pulled apart? I was raised as a Unitarian in a humanist way, atheist, humanist in there somewhere, without Christian teachings whatsoever. Biology was the focus of my family's culture, education was our religion, and nature was our devotion. The natural order of our world was well understood among us, but the world of emotions and the language of spirituality, not so much. As Joseph Campbell would say, I was not well acquainted with the literature of the spirit. In the absence of a spiritual vocabulary without religious teachings, I had a sense of right and wrong and a need to challenge myself to be my best, but this was pretty well entirely up to me alone, no matter what. I didn't know the meaning of words like faith and grace and compassion. Then came a rapid-fire series of events: births, illnesses, a major move, death, career loss. I needed more tools than I had to cope with the life I found myself in and to know who I was now. I began going to church. And there, the minister's preaching opened me to a world of religious teachings, meanings, and values I'd been ignorant of. And with my spiritual curiosity unleashed, I began a meditation practice that shook loose many of my assumptions about life, sometimes very vigorously. Here, I let go of my rationality to engage the mystery, and then I entered seminary. And it was in seminary that I learned the term spiritual formation. And I thought I knew what it meant. It sounds kind of pleasant, doesn't it? Well, honestly, it's not. But we don't talk about that very much, so I'm going to tell you. How many of you have worked with clay in the room? Quite a few of you. So, you remember how you ready a block of clay for shaping by the potter? It is thrown on a slab repeatedly, lifted up, flipped over, and slammed on the slab, pounded and beaten on until it takes a quality of suppleness and strength so that it can take a new, more refined shape. This is the best metaphor from my experience, and perhaps some of you as well. And it was my commitment to serve the world the best way I could by becoming a UU minister that forced me to take the jump to faith. This was a matter of faith because becoming a minister required me to explain myself before various panels and peer groups in ways that, with my background, I was ill-equipped to do. I froze when the spotlight was turned on me, unable to articulate my thoughts, if I had any. These sessions felt to me like an inquisition rather than a reasonable inquiry, and the most critical of these and its devastating outcome demoralized me badly, forcing me to retreat and recover for a very long time. But the question, the call of ministry returned. It meant facing the Inquisition again. It meant leaving my children and home to train, years of my life on the hook again for this pursuit, subjecting myself to scrutiny I didn't know I could succeed in, leaving the seclusion of my world where I could rail against the awfulness of it all, putting down my righteousness, rising above my anxiety, and stepping into a new reality, unknown and not guaranteed to turn out well. Certain moments stand out. There are times etched in my memory as watershed moments where I endured emotional pressure beyond what I thought possible and was reshaped inside. There was the moment when I felt so undone that I was straight amazed that I didn't just simply ooze through the mattress upon which I was lying and into the earth below the floor. Yet I wasn't. I was suddenly aware of the order of the universe that kept the physical world intact, and I was deeply grateful for it. There was the day when I finalized my choice, like the reluctant prophets of the Old Testament. My experience was more Shakespeare than Old Testament, as I swear I gave a pound of flesh off my back as I accepted my call again, as I became faithful. It was then that I contacted Reverend Christine about an internship and was amazed to receive an interview and then the position. I had only 6 months here, but it was a pivotal time in my journey. For the first time, I experienced real support and affirmation as a minister, and critically, where I was encouraged to find my voice, and I learned I was a storyteller. And there was the day when I subjected myself to the Inquisition once more, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. ready to meet the consequences, good or bad. I surely felt alive, and the volume of my awareness was turned up high, even more so when I was accepted into preliminary fellowship. As the saying goes, it took everything I had and more. But what is that more? Is it God? Is it the interdependent web of life? Is it parts of the brain being pushed into hyperdrive? I don't know. I could align myself with any and all of these possibilities. Campbell says, people say that what we're all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking, he says. I think that what we're seeking is an experience of being alive, so that our life experiences on the purely physical plane will have resonances within our innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. In the animal kingdom, when an animal is challenged, it will defend itself, either by being aggressive or trying to escape its danger. It's called the fight or flight response. And we humans are not immune to this or above this natural instinct, and both strategies can end in destruction. We humans live in community, and together over the millennia, we have found other ways of responding when we'd rather react. Life asks us to be fierce in our commitment to it, to ourselves and to those we belong to hang on to ourselves and take the leap to faith. And as we do, we may eventually find a place within or a time within where we discover that we are no longer falling, but being held instead. A place of vibrant stillness, of expansive mystery, and of oneness where we feel whole again. Not the old wholeness, not a whole new wholeness, a different wholeness, with a stronger sense of what in ourself is permanent and real. Or not. Suffering a loss or facing a challenge can strain our limits and make us want to escape what is, or to cling to what was, to be anywhere but here in the present, or to hope that someone or something will save us. We can try to run away. We can try to control. We can indulge in mind-altering pursuits, but none changes that the past is past. Both trying to control or giving up entirely are refusals to accept our world is changing. These are hopeless pursuits, follies in the face of the larger reality. So that's the choice, faith or folly. Sometimes what seems most solid and stable is only an illusion of stability. Things that appear more ethereal, that may seem the toughest to grasp, are in fact the most stable and secure. Love, faith, and community may seem to be intangible ideals, but if nurtured, they can serve as the very bedrock of our lives. Even if we cannot imagine a future without that part of the past we desperately want to hold on to, this may be, staying present is what we need to do. This is what it takes to find the place of truth, where we find that resonance within our innermost being and reality, where we actually feel the rapture of being alive. When bad things happen, they do not have a meaning of their own. We will never find peace in what happened. And yet, being changed beyond our imagination in the ways of faith is ultimately a gift. Our understanding of humanity and the fullness of life are deepened. We learn respect for vulnerability. we learn compassion, we learn joy. And these life-altering lessons make our lives more meaningful, and we are transformed again and again and again. I have just celebrated the end of my ministry with the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Central Oregon. Say that 5 times fast. A most challenging and transformative ministry that I could not have done without the support of this congregation and Reverend Christine. That congregation's parting words were that they will deeply miss my words and my voice, gifts that you helped me find. And so I thank you for having faith in me as your intern minister those many years ago. I close with an untitled poem by Wendell Berry. No, there is no going back. Less and less you are the possibility you were. More and more you have become those lives and deaths that have belonged to you. You have become a sort of grave containing much that was and is no more in time. Beloved, then, now, and always. And so you have become a sort of tree standing over the grave. Now more than ever, you can be generous toward each day that comes, young to disappear forever, and yet remain unaging in the mind. Every day you have less reason not to give yourself away. Blessed be.